I thought I was just being decent, using the little sign language I knew to help a frustrated kid in a crowded cafe, but decency apparently makes you valuable in the wrong circles. Her uncle appeared within the hour, this terrifying man with cold eyes and colder threats, saying his mute niece had smiled for the first time in months, and I wasn't allowed to take that away from her. And when armed men tried to kill us both at a children's park, I had to wonder, did he want me there to protect her? Or to die for her? The coffee shop smelled like burnt espresso and broken dreams, the kind of place where people came to hide from their lives rather than live them. Rachel Carter sat in the corner booth farthest from the window, her laptop open but untouched, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears the sky couldn't hold back anymore. She'd been coming here for 3 months now, ever since the apartment she shared with her younger brother became too quiet, too full of memories of their mother's laughter that would never echo through those rooms again. The barista knew her order by heart now: black coffee with 2 sugars, and never asked why a 26-year-old woman spent every Thursday evening sitting alone in a coffee shop that closed at 9. Tonight felt different, though. There was a thickness to the air that made Rachel's skin prickle with awareness, like static electricity before a storm. That's when she noticed her. A girl, maybe 10 years old, sat 3 tables away with a man who looked carved from marble and expensive mistakes. The child's hands moved through the air with desperate precision, forming shapes and patterns that Rachel recognized instantly because she'd spent 5 years of her life learning that language. Her heart clenched, watching those small fingers spell out words that no one seemed to see. The girl tried to get the attention of passing customers, of the barista refilling water glasses, of anyone who might acknowledge that she existed, but every single person looked through her like she was made of glass. Rachel frowned, studying the scene more carefully. The girl wore a velvet dress that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly rent, her dark hair pulled back with a silver clip that caught the light. Despite the late hour, she looked alert, but there was something in her eyes that made Rachel's chest ache, a loneliness so profound it seemed to swallow all the light around her. Why is everyone pretending she's not there? The man sitting across from the girl was checking his phone with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he was conducting business that couldn't wait. His black suit fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body, and even sitting down, he radiated the kind of power that made people step aside without knowing why. Rachel watched as the girl's hands moved faster, more urgently, signing something that looked like "please" and "talk to me" and "I'm here." Her small face scrunched up with frustration. When the barista approached their table, took the man's coffee order, and walked away, without even glancing at the child. That was enough. Rachel had learned sign language in college when she'd volunteered at a school for deaf children, had fallen in love with the beauty of communication that didn't need sound. Even after she'd stopped volunteering, stopped doing most things that made her feel alive, she'd never forgotten how to listen with her eyes and speak with her hands. She'd promised herself she'd always be ready to help someone who needed it, even if she couldn't help herself anymore. Standing up on legs that felt unsteady, Rachel walked across the coffee shop, acutely aware of how the quiet conversation seemed to die as she passed. The girl looked up as she approached, her brown eyes widening with surprise when Rachel slid into the empty chair beside her. "Hi there," Rachel said softly, then lifted her hands and signed. "What's your name?" The transformation was instant and heartbreaking. The girl's entire face lit up like someone had just switched on the sun inside her. Her hands flew into motion, signing so fast that Rachel had to ask her to slow down. "My name is Sophie," she signed, tears welling up in her eyes. "You can understand me?" "Yes, I can understand you perfectly," Rachel signed back, her own throat tightening with emotion. "Are you okay? Where's your mom?" Before Sophie could answer, the man across the table finally looked up from his phone, and Rachel felt the temperature in the coffee shop drop 10 degrees. His eyes were the color of a winter storm, gray and dangerous and absolutely focused on her. "You know sign language," he said, and it wasn't a question. His voice carried an accent Rachel couldn't quite place, something European mixed with years of living somewhere else. "I do," Rachel managed to say, trying not to show how intimidating she found him. "Your daughter was trying to communicate." "She's not." The man paused, something flickering across his face. "Sophie isn't my daughter. She's my niece." Sophie's hands moved quickly, correcting him. "Uncle Alex takes care of me now. My parents died." The words were signed with the kind of matter-of-fact sadness that only children who'd had to grow up too fast could manage. Rachel's heart shattered a little more. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Alex was studying Rachel with laser intensity now, and she felt like an insect pinned to a board. "Who are you?" "Rachel Carter. I volunteer, well, I used to volunteer with deaf kids. I learned sign language years ago." She forced herself to meet his gaze even though every instinct told her to look away. "I just saw her trying to communicate and thought I could help." "Help!" Alex repeated the word like he was testing how it tasted. Behind him, Rachel noticed for the first time that two men in dark suits had positioned themselves near the coffee shop's entrance. They weren't drinking anything, weren't looking at their phones, just standing there like sentries. "Miss Carter, do you have any idea who I am?" The question made Rachel's stomach clench with sudden fear. "Should I?" Alex's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Most people in this city know to stay away from me and anyone associated with me. It's safer that way." Sophie's hand found Rachel's across the table, small and warm and trusting. "Please don't leave," the girl signed. "Everyone always leaves when they know about Uncle Alex, but you're the first person who's talked to me in months, really talked to me." Rachel looked at the child, then back at Alex. "I don't know who you are, but I know your niece deserves to be seen. She deserves to be heard." Something shifted in Alex's expression, just a flicker, but Rachel caught it. For a moment, the granite mask slipped, revealing something almost vulnerable underneath. "You have no idea what you're getting involved in," he said quietly. "You should walk away right now, Miss Carter. Forget you ever met us." "I can't do that." The words were out before Rachel could stop them. Sophie's hand was still in hers, and the hope in the girl's eyes was too precious to abandon. Alex leaned back in his chair, studying her with renewed interest. "Can't or won't?" "Both." Alex pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in rapid Italian that Rachel couldn't follow. When he hung up, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "My driver is bringing the car around. You're coming with us." "Excuse me?" Rachel started to stand, but Alex's hand shot out, not grabbing her but hovering in a gesture that somehow felt more compelling than force. "That wasn't a request, Miss Carter. You see, my niece hasn't trusted anyone outside of me in the 2 years since her parents died. Not her bodyguards, not her tutors, not the staff at my home. No one." His gray eyes bored into hers. "Until tonight. Until you." Rachel's mouth went dry. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my niece needs you, Miss Carter. And what Sophie needs, she gets." He stood up, extending his hand to Sophie, who took it without hesitation but kept her other hand wrapped around Rachel's. "You can come willingly, or my men can escort you. Either way, you're not walking away from this." "This is insane," Rachel whispered. "I work at a bookstore and live in a studio apartment with my little brother. I'm nobody." Alex paused, looking back at her with something almost like regret in his expression. "Maybe so, but you just became very important to the only person in this world I actually care about. That changes everything." As Rachel was gently but firmly guided toward the door by the two men in suits, she caught sight of Sophie looking back at her with absolute trust and joy, signing "thank you" over and over again. The coffee shop door closed behind them with a soft chime, and Rachel realized she was stepping into a world she'd never imagined existed. The black car waiting at the curb had windows too dark to see through and an engine that purred like a predator. She was entering a world of wealth and danger she never could have imagined, and there was no way back. The iron gates of the estate opened silently as their car approached, revealing a world Rachel had only seen in movies about people whose money came with blood on it. The house loomed before them like something out of a Gothic fairy tale, all stone and sharp angles surrounded by grounds that probably cost more to maintain than Rachel made in a decade. But it was the subtle details that made her stomach twist with dread. Security cameras tracked their movement from every angle. Men in dark suits patrolled the perimeter with the practiced efficiency of soldiers. The windows weren't just tinted, they were reinforced, thick enough that Rachel could see the telltale distortion around the edges. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress designed to keep the world out and something precious locked safely inside. "Welcome to our world," Alex said quietly as they pulled up the circular drive. Sophie had fallen asleep against his shoulder during the drive, her small face peaceful in a way that made Rachel's heart ache. The front door opened before they even reached it, revealing a tall woman in her 50s, wearing a crisp black uniform. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her blue eyes swept over Rachel with obvious disapproval. "Sir," the woman said, her voice carrying a British accent and absolutely no warmth. "The guest room has been prepared." Her gaze flicked to Sophie, still sleeping in Alex's arms, and Rachel saw something flicker across her face. Not affection, not even basic concern, but something closer to resignation mixed with careful distance. As they entered the foyer, Rachel was struck by the cold grandeur of it all. Marble floors reflected the light from a chandelier that probably cost more than her childhood home. Oil paintings in heavy gold frames lined the walls, stern-faced men who all bore some resemblance to Alex watching with disapproving eyes. But despite all the wealth on display, the house felt empty, lifeless, like a museum where nothing was meant to be touched. "Ms. Peterson will show you to your room," Alex said, gesturing to the severe woman. "We'll discuss the arrangements tomorrow." "Wait," Rachel said, finding her voice. "What arrangements? What exactly do you expect me to do here?" Alex paused at the foot of a grand staircase, Sophie still in his arms. "Help my niece. Give her what everyone else in this house has failed to provide." "Which is?" "A childhood." The word hit Rachel like a physical blow. As Alex carried Sophie upstairs, she followed Ms. Peterson through hallways lined with more security cameras and silent, watchful men. Everyone they passed diverted their eyes from her, but Rachel could feel their curiosity radiating like heat. "The girl doesn't usually bring strangers home," Ms. Peterson said finally as they climbed to the second floor. "You mean Alex?" The older woman's steps faltered almost imperceptibly. "I mean Miss Sophie, ma'am. She's particular about people. Doesn't take to anyone. Most of the staff find her difficult." Rachel stopped walking. "Difficult how?" Ms. Peterson's face closed off immediately. "Nothing for you to worry about, ma'am. Here's your room." She opened a door to reveal a bedroom that was larger than Rachel's entire apartment, decorated in soft grays and whites with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Ms. Peterson," Rachel said before the woman could escape. "How long has Sophie lived like this, surrounded by people who are afraid of her?" The housekeeper's knuckles went white as she gripped the door handle. "That child is Mr. Volkov's heir now that her parents are gone, ma'am. Everything she touches turns dangerous whether she means it to or not. The staff, we do our jobs. We keep her safe. But getting close to her, caring about her, that's not safe for anyone." After Ms. Peterson left, Rachel sat on the edge of the impossibly soft bed and tried to process what she'd walked into. Through her window, she could see guards patrolling the grounds, their movements choreographed and deadly serious. She was still sitting there an hour later when she heard it, a soft tapping on her door. When she opened it, Sophie stood in the hallway wearing pajamas covered in stars, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," she signed. "Can we talk?" Rachel glanced around the empty hallway, then stepped aside to let her in. "Of course. Are you okay?" Sophie perched on the edge of a chair that was far too big for her, her legs swinging freely. "Everyone here is scared of me," she signed, her small hands moving with practiced sadness. "They do things for me, but they never talk to me. Not really. They look at me like I'm broken." Rachel's heart shattered. She knelt down in front of her, bringing herself to Sophie's eye level. "You're not broken, sweetheart. You're perfect exactly as you are. Uncle Alex says that too, but he's the only one. Well, now you have me too." For the next hour, Rachel did something revolutionary in that cold, sterile mansion. She made Sophie laugh. She told her silly stories, played simple games with her hands, and taught her new signs that had nothing to do with orders or instructions or fear. Just pure, joyful communication. When Sophie giggled, actually giggled at her impression of a grumpy cat, Rachel felt something shift in the house around them. From the doorway hidden in shadow, Alex observed his niece's transformation with growing unease. In one evening, this woman had given Sophie something he'd been searching for since her parents died: normalcy, joy, the simple pleasure of being understood and accepted without fear. But in Alex's world, happiness was a liability, love was a weakness, and Rachel Carter was rapidly becoming both. 20 miles across the city in a smoke-filled warehouse, Viktor Petrov ended a phone call with a satisfied smile. "So, the boss has a new weakness," he told his assembled crew. "First the kid, now some girl who can talk to her." "What's the play, boss?" asked his lieutenant. Victor's smile turned predatory. "We take them both." 3 weeks into her new life at the estate, Rachel had established a routine that both terrified and exhilarated her. Every morning she would find Sophie waiting outside her door with a backpack and an eager smile, ready for lessons that bore no resemblance to traditional education. Instead of math and history, Rachel taught her how to express emotions she'd never been allowed to feel. Instead of reading from textbooks, they created stories with their hands about brave knights and talking animals. Most importantly, she taught her that her thoughts and feelings mattered, something no one had ever bothered to tell her before. "Today, we're going to learn about feelings," Rachel signed as they sat in the mansion's vast library, surrounded by books that probably hadn't been touched in decades. "I know feelings," Sophie signed back. "Happy, scared. Those are good starts, but what about frustrated, excited, proud?" Rachel demonstrated each sign, watching Sophie's eyes widen with recognition. "I feel frustrated when Ms. Peterson runs away when I try to ask for cookies," Sophie signed eagerly. "And excited when you teach me new words, and proud when Uncle Alex watches us and smiles." Rachel's hands stilled. "Your uncle watches us?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Every day. He stands in the doorway and watches you teach me. He thinks I don't notice, but I always do." A flutter of something Rachel didn't want to examine too closely stirred in her chest. She'd been acutely aware of Alex's presence over the past weeks. The way conversations died when he entered a room. The way his staff moved around him with choreographed precision. The way his rare smiles transformed his entire face when he looked at his niece. But she hadn't realized he'd been watching her work with Sophie. That evening, Rachel got her confirmation. She was in the kitchen making Sophie a late snack when she heard voices from Alex's study. The door was slightly ajar, and two men were speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "The Petrov family is making moves, boss," she heard one man say. Victor's been asking questions about your niece, about her routines. Rachel froze, a jar of peanut butter halfway to the counter. What kind of questions? Alex's voice was deadly quiet. About her schedule, her security detail, where she goes during the day. And boss. The man's voice dropped even lower. They're asking about the girl, too. The one who talks to her. Rachel's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the kitchen wall, straining to hear more. Victor thinks the kid is your weakness, the second man continued. He's planning something big. Thinks if he can get to the girl, he can force you out and take over the territory. There was a long silence, and when Alex spoke again, his voice carried the kind of cold fury that made Rachel's skin crawl. Let him try. Anyone who touches Sophie dies slowly. What about the other girl, boss? She's not protected like Sophie is. If Victor's smart, he'll go after her first. Rachel didn't wait to hear Alex's response. Her heart hammering against her ribs, she ran through the mansion's halls, taking the stairs 2 at a time until she reached Alex's study. The door was still cracked open, and she could see him standing behind his massive desk, his face carved from granite as he listened to his men's reports. Without thinking, Rachel pushed through the door. Rachel. Alex's expression shifted immediately from cold calculation to surprise. His 2 men stepped protectively in front of their boss, hands moving toward concealed weapons. I heard, Rachel said breathlessly. I was in the kitchen and I heard them talking about Viktor Petrov, about plans to hurt Sophie, to hurt me. The silence that followed was deafening. Alex studied her face with laser intensity, and Rachel realized she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She had voluntarily involved herself in his dangerous world. How much did you hear? Alex asked quietly. Enough to know that Sophie is in danger because of me. I should leave. If my being here puts her at risk. No. Alex's voice cut through her words like a blade. He moved around his desk with fluid grace, stopping just inches from where she stood. This close, Rachel could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something darker. You're not leaving. But if Viktor Petrov is a dead man walking, Alex said with absolute certainty. And you? He reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers surprisingly warm against her skin. You just proved something I wasn't sure I could trust. What? That you'd risk your own safety to warn me about a threat to Sophie. Alex's thumb traced across her cheekbone, and Rachel felt her breath catch. That you'd choose us over your own freedom. Rachel's heart was beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. Of course I would. Sophie is special. And you? She trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Alex's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. For a moment, the dangerous man disappeared, replaced by someone who looked almost vulnerable. From this moment forward, he said, his voice carrying the weight of an unbreakable vow. You are under my protection. No one touches you, Rachel. Not Victor. Not anyone. The way he said her name sent shivers down her spine. Double the security detail. Alex called to his men without taking his eyes off Rachel's face. Put out the word. Anyone who so much as looks at Miss Carter wrong answers to me personally. As his men left to carry out his orders, Alex's hand was still cupping Rachel's face, and she realized with startling clarity that she was no longer just Sophie's teacher. She was falling for her uncle. 2 days after Rachel had rushed to warn Alex about the Petrov threat, she made a decision that would change everything. Sophie had been cooped up in the mansion for weeks, her lessons confined to rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. The girl needed sunlight, fresh air, and the simple joy of being a normal kid, even if just for an hour. Absolutely not, Alex said when Rachel brought up the idea during breakfast. He was dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, his dark hair still damp from his morning shower, looking every inch the powerful businessman rather than the dangerous man she knew him to be. "Please, Uncle Alex." Sophie signed from her seat at the enormous dining table. "I want to see the ducks at Riverside Park. Rachel says there's a pond where they swim." Alex's gray eyes softened as they always did when he looked at his niece, but his jaw remained set. "It's not safe, sweetheart. Not right now." "It could be," Rachel said carefully. "What if we brought security? Kept it short, just an hour. She's 10 years old, Alex. She's never just played in a park." The words hit their target. Rachel watched Alex's face as he processed what she'd said, that his niece had never experienced something as simple and fundamental as playing in a park. "1 hour," Alex said finally. "Full security detail, and you stay within 10 feet of Thomas at all times." Sophie's face lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Riverside Park on a Wednesday afternoon was perfect, quiet, peaceful, with just a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the autumn air. Rachel sat on a bench watching Sophie feed breadcrumbs to a family of ducks, her entire body vibrating with excitement as the birds paddled closer to shore. "They're not scared of me," Sophie signed to Rachel with wonder. "They come right up to me." "Animals are smart," Rachel signed back. "They know you have a good heart." Thomas and 3 other men in dark suits had positioned themselves around the small pond with military precision, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. To anyone watching, they probably looked like Secret Service agents. But Rachel had learned to read the subtle signs, the way their hands hovered near concealed weapons, the way they communicated with tiny earpieces, the way they never relaxed even for a second. She was so focused on Sophie's joy that she almost missed the jogger who passed by their bench for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Almost. Rachel's pulse quickened as she noticed other details she'd overlooked before. The maintenance worker who'd been fixing the same trash can for 20 minutes. The woman with the baby stroller who kept circling back toward them. The van parked across the street with tinted windows. "Thomas," Rachel called quietly. But before the bodyguard could respond, everything exploded into chaos. The jogger pulled a gun from his waistband and fired 3 rapid shots at Thomas, who dove to the ground, drawing his own weapon. The maintenance worker and stroller woman suddenly produced automatic rifles from their equipment, and the van's doors burst open, disgorging 6 masked men in tactical gear. "Get down!" Thomas roared, but Rachel was already moving. Sophie was frozen by the pond's edge, her small face white with terror as gunfire erupted around her. Rachel sprinted across the grass, her only thought getting to her before the masked men could. She tackled Sophie just as a spray of bullets chewed through the bench where she'd been standing moments before, rolling both of them behind a large oak tree. Sophie was shaking uncontrollably, her hands moving in frantic, terrified signs that Rachel couldn't decipher through her own panic. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, pressing Sophie's face against her shoulder so she couldn't see the violence erupting around them. "I've got you. I won't let anyone hurt you." Thomas and his men were outnumbered but not outgunned. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed across the park as they fought back with professional precision. Then she heard the screech of tires as more vehicles arrived. But these weren't reinforcements for Alex's men. "There, the kid!" someone shouted, and Rachel looked up to see 2 masked figures flanking their position. She didn't think. She simply reacted. Rachel threw herself in front of Sophie just as one of the men fired, feeling a line of fire tear across her left side as the bullet grazed her ribs. The impact spun her around, and in that moment of disorientation, rough hands grabbed Sophie and yanked her away from her. "No!" Rachel screamed, lunging forward despite the blood spreading across her shirt. "Sophie!" One of the masked men backhanded her across the face, sending her crashing to the ground. Through blurred vision, she saw them dragging Sophie toward a black van. The girl's terrified eyes locked on hers as she signed desperately, "Help me!" Rachel tried to get up, tried to run after them, but her vision grayed out, and she collapsed onto the grass, her own blood pooling beneath her. The last thing she heard before losing consciousness was the squeal of tires as they took Sophie away. When Rachel woke up 6 hours later in a private hospital room, the first face she saw was Alex's. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the span of an afternoon. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt was stained with what looked like blood, and his gray eyes burned with a fury that made her shrink back against her hospital pillows. "They took her," she whispered, and the words felt like swallowing glass. "I tried to protect her, but they took her." Alex's hands were shaking, actually shaking as he reached out to touch her face. "Rachel, you took a bullet for my niece. You threw yourself between her and armed men without hesitation." But it wasn't enough. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "She's gone because of me. Because I wanted her to see the stupid ducks. She's gone because Viktor Petrov is a dead man who just doesn't know it yet." Alex's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than screaming. "I'm going to burn the city to the ground until I find my niece. And when I do..." He stood up, straightening his jacket with movements that looked almost robotic. "Viktor Petrov is going to learn what happens when you take everything that matters to me." Through the hospital room's window, Rachel could see smoke rising from 3 different locations across the city's skyline. The war had begun. The warehouse smelled of rust, motor oil, and fear. Sophie sat huddled in the corner of a windowless room, her wrists bound with zip ties that cut into her small hands every time she tried to move them. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast harsh shadows that made the masked men look like monsters as they paced back and forth, speaking in low voices about ransom demands and territorial negotiations. But Sophie couldn't hear their words. She could only see their lips moving, their gestures growing more agitated as hours passed. What terrified her most wasn't the gun one of them carried, or the way they ignored her desperate attempts to communicate. It was the absolute silence of her world, made even more isolating by the knowledge that no one here would ever understand her. "Rachel," she thought desperately, her small hands forming the name in sign language, even though no one was watching. "Where are you?" Across the city, Rachel was staging her own rebellion against Alex's protection. She'd been discharged from the hospital that morning against medical advice, the bandages across her ribs pulling tight with every movement. Alex had immediately installed her in a safe house with 6 armed guards, strict instructions not to leave under any circumstances. He'd underestimated her determination. "I need some air," Rachel told Thomas, who was stationed outside her bedroom door with his arm in a sling from the park shooting. "Just on the balcony." Thomas nodded, his face grim with exhaustion. 5 minutes, then back inside." Rachel stepped onto the small balcony and immediately began studying the fire escape that zigzagged down the building's side. The guards were watching the front entrance, the elevator, and the stairwells, but they'd overlooked the most obvious route. 10 minutes later, she was on the street, adrenaline overriding the pain in her side as she hailed a taxi. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, noticing her hospital bracelet and the way she moved carefully. "The docks," Rachel said, "and I'll pay you double if you don't ask questions." During the ride, Rachel's mind raced through every conversation she'd had with Sophie about her life before they met. The girl had mentioned playing games with her uncle where they would practice emergency signs, specific gestures that only they knew, designed for situations where silence was crucial. "If you're ever in trouble and can't make noise," Alex had taught her, "use the old signs, the ones from when I was growing up in Moscow." Sophie had shown Rachel some of these signs during their lessons, giggling as she demonstrated this secret language she shared with her uncle. Russian Sign Language, older variations that predated modern systems. Rachel had been charmed by the family bond it represented. Now, those same signs might be Sophie's only way to communicate with her rescuers. Rachel had another advantage. 3 weeks of living with Sophie had taught her to think like her. The girl was fascinated by water, always drawing pictures of boats and harbors. When she was scared, she gravitated toward places that reminded her of safety and escape. The warehouse district near the river stretched for miles, but Rachel started with the buildings closest to the water, the ones where a terrified 10-year-old might imagine boats that could carry her home. She found her on her fourth attempt. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but Rachel noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt and cigarette butts that hadn't been weathered by rain. More importantly, she saw movement behind a second-floor window, just a shadow, but it was small enough to be a child. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs as she studied the building's layout. 2 guards at the front entrance, 1 walking the perimeter. She needed a way in that wouldn't alert them to her presence. The loading dock on the building's east side had a broken window just large enough for someone Rachel's size to slip through. The glass cut into her palms as she pulled herself inside, but she bit back any sound that might give her away. The warehouse interior was a maze of stacked crates and abandoned machinery. Rachel moved through it like a ghost, following the sound of voices toward the back of the building. When she finally found the room where they were holding Sophie, she nearly cried with relief. She was alive, scared, but alive. Rachel positioned herself near a gap in the wooden crates, where she could see into the room without being spotted. 3 men, all armed, all focused on a phone conversation with someone who was clearly giving them orders. "Boss wants the kid delivered by midnight," one of them said. "Says if Volkov doesn't cave by then, we send him pieces." Rachel's blood went cold, but she forced herself to focus. Sophie was sitting against the far wall, her dark eyes darting around the room as if searching for escape routes. Even bound and terrified, she was thinking, planning, just like her uncle had taught her. Moving carefully, Rachel positioned herself where Sophie could see her through the gap in the crates. She waited until the guards were distracted by their phone call, then began signing in the old Russian variation Sophie had shown her. "Little Star," she signed, using the pet name Alex called his niece. "I'm here." Sophie's eyes went wide, but to her credit, she didn't make a sound or sudden movement. Instead, she began signing back with tiny, careful gestures that wouldn't attract attention. 3 men, 2 guns. One has keys to the car outside. They're waiting for Uncle Alex to call. They want to trade me for something. "Can you move quietly?" Rachel signed back. "Yes, but Rachel." Sophie's face grew urgent. "The man with the scar is coming back. He went to check something. He'll be here soon." Rachel felt her blood turn to ice. A 4th man, one she hadn't accounted for. And he was already on his way back. "When I signal, get ready to run," she told Sophie. "No matter what happens, you run to the water and hide. Your uncle will find you." But even as she signed the words, Rachel knew they were probably both going to die in this warehouse. She was one unarmed woman against 4 armed men, wounded and running on pure determination. It didn't matter. She wouldn't let Sophie face this alone. Just as Rachel was preparing to create some kind of distraction, Sophie's hands moved in frantic warning. "Behind you." Rachel spun around to find herself face to face with a man whose scarred face she recognized from Alex's security briefings. Viktor Petrov himself, pointing a gun directly at her head. "Well, well," Viktor said with a cold smile. "Looks like Volkov's little girlfriend came to play hero." Rachel forced herself to meet his eyes, even though her knees felt like they might give out. "Let the girl go, Viktor. Your fight is with Alex, not with a 10-year-old. "Oh, but you're wrong about that," Viktor said, stepping closer. Through the gap in the crates, Rachel could see Sophie watching with wide, terrified eyes. "The girl is the key to everything. Volkov's weakness, his soft spot." Viktor's gaze flicked to Rachel. "Though it looks like he's developed another one." From inside the room, one of Viktor's men called out, "Boss, we got movement on the perimeter. Multiple vehicles approaching fast." Viktor's smile widened. "Right on schedule. Seems Papa Bear found our little hiding spot after all." He pressed the gun against Rachel's temple, the metal cold against her skin. Here's how this is going to work, sweetheart. You're going to walk into that room nice and slow, and then we're all going to wait for Alex to come save his precious family. Rachel's mind raced as Victor forced her toward the room where Sophie was being held. Through the broken windows, she could hear the distant rumble of engines, multiple vehicles moving fast. Her heart soared with desperate hope, even as Victor's gun never wavered from her head. But it was the sound that came next that made Victor's confident smile falter. The sharp crack of sniper fire from somewhere outside the warehouse. "What the hell was that?" one of Victor's men shouted. "Jimmy's not responding on radio," another called out. "Neither is Tony at the front entrance." Victor's grip on Rachel tightened. "Doesn't matter. We still have the kid and the girl. Volkov won't risk—" The warehouse's front wall exploded inward. The blast was deafening, sending chunks of concrete and twisted metal flying across the space. Through the smoke and dust, dark figures poured through the breach with military precision. Rachel caught glimpses of muzzle flashes and heard the controlled bursts of automatic weapons fire as Alex's men systematically cleared the building. But it was Alex himself who appeared through the smoke like an avenging angel that made Rachel's breath catch. Gone was the carefully controlled businessman in the expensive suit. This was Alex in his true element, dressed in tactical gear, carrying a military-grade assault rifle, his gray eyes burning with a fury that could have melted steel. He moved through the warehouse like death itself, every motion calculated and lethal. "Victor," Alex's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "I'm here for my niece. Send her out and maybe I let you live." "You're in no position to make demands, Volkov," Victor shouted back, dragging Rachel into the room where Sophie was being held. His remaining men took defensive positions behind overturned tables and machinery. "I've got your niece and your girlfriend. One wrong move and they both die." Alex appeared in the doorway like a nightmare made flesh, his weapon trained on Victor. "Let them go, and I'll make it quick." Victor laughed, pressing his gun harder against Rachel's head. "You think you scare me? You think—" Rachel saw her chance when Victor's attention shifted to Alex. In one desperate motion, she drove her elbow back into Victor's ribs and dove toward Sophie, wrapping her arms around the terrified girl just as gunfire erupted throughout the room. Victor's men opened fire on Alex's position, but he was already moving, rolling behind cover as his own men flanked the room from multiple angles. The sound was deafening. Automatic weapons, shouted orders, the crash of equipment being destroyed by bullets. Rachel pressed Sophie's face against her shoulder, shielding her with her body as debris rained down around them. She could feel the girl shaking against her, small hands clinging to her shirt, as Rachel tried to make herself as large as possible between Sophie and the violence. "I've got you," she whispered in Sophie's ear, even though she knew the girl couldn't hear her over the gunfire. "I've got you, baby. It's going to be okay." A bullet whizzed past Rachel's head so close she felt the heat of it and embedded itself in the wall behind her. Another shattered a wooden crate just inches from where they huddled. Through it all, Rachel kept herself wrapped around Sophie like a human shield, absorbing the impact when falling debris struck her back and shoulders. The firefight seemed to last forever, but in reality it was probably less than 2 minutes. Alex's men were professionals, and Victor's crew were street thugs with more ego than training. One by one, Victor's men fell until only Victor himself remained, wounded and cornered, behind an overturned table. "It's over, Victor," Alex called out, his voice deadly calm now that the shooting had stopped. "Come out." "Go to hell, Volkov," Victor snarled, but Rachel could hear the fear in his voice now. What happened next would be burned into Rachel's memory forever. Alex stepped into the open, completely exposed, his weapon lowered. For a moment, Rachel thought he'd lost his mind. Victor still had a gun, was still dangerous. But then she saw the cold calculation in Alex's eyes, the way he moved with absolute confidence. Victor took the bait. He rose from behind his cover, gun raised, triumph flashing across his scarred face. Alex was faster. The single shot was precise, final. Victor crumpled to the floor, his weapon clattering away harmlessly. In the sudden silence that followed, Alex's mask finally dropped. His hands were shaking as he ran to where Rachel and Sophie huddled against the wall, falling to his knees beside them. Sophie, Rachel, are you hurt? His voice cracked as he reached out to touch his niece's face. Did they hurt you? Uncle Alex, Sophie signed, launching herself into his arms. Rachel saved me. She jumped in front of the bullets. Alex's gray eyes found Rachel's, and what she saw there took her breath away. Not the cold boss, not the calculated killer, but a man who had nearly lost everything that mattered to him. You could have died, he whispered, his hand gentle as he touched the cuts on her face from flying debris. So could she, Rachel whispered back. And in that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of violence in a dusty warehouse, Rachel realized she was looking at a man who would burn the entire world to keep his family safe. The question was, when had she started thinking of herself as part of that family? The estate had never felt more like home than it did in the golden light of dawn 3 days after the warehouse. Rachel sat curled in the library's window seat, watching Sophie play in the garden under the watchful eyes of her bodyguards. The girl was different now, not broken by her ordeal, but somehow stronger, more confident in the way she moved through the world. Maybe that came from finally understanding that she was worth fighting for. Rachel's ribs still ached from the bullet graze and the debris that had rained down on her in the warehouse. But seeing Sophie's joy made every moment of pain worthwhile. She was currently trying to teach one of the younger guards basic sign language, her small hands moving with patient enthusiasm as the burly man fumbled through the alphabet. She's never done that before. Rachel turned to find Alex standing in the doorway, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. Gone was the perfectly pressed suit, replaced by dark jeans and a simple black sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. His gray eyes held a warmth she was still getting used to. Done what? Rachel asked softly. Try to teach someone else to sign. Alex moved into the room, settling into the chair across from her window seat. For 2 years, signing was something private between us, her secret language that no one else could understand. Now, he gestured toward the window where Sophie was giggling at her students' attempts to sign thank you. Now she wants to share it with the world. Rachel felt her throat tighten with emotion. She's not hiding anymore. No, Alex agreed quietly. She's not. His gaze shifted from his niece to Rachel's face, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Do you know what you've given her, Rachel? I don't know what you mean. Alex leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he searched for the right words. For 2 years, I watched my niece disappear a little more each day. She was there. She was breathing. She was alive. But she was fading away like a ghost. No one saw her. No one heard her. No one tried to understand who she really was underneath the fear. Rachel's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. I learned sign language the day she came to live with me, Alex continued. Bought every book, hired every teacher, practiced until my hands cramped. But I could only give her words, Rachel. You gave her something far more precious. What's that? A voice. Alex's voice broke slightly. You gave my niece a voice in a world that had decided she was invisible. You made her real again. Tears blurred Rachel's vision as she watched this powerful, dangerous man struggle with emotions he'd probably never allowed himself to feel before. Alex, I need to ask you something, he said, standing up and moving to the window where he could see Sophie playing. And I need you to think carefully before you answer, because once I ask it, there's no going back. Rachel's heart began to race. Okay. Alex turned to face her, and she was stunned to see vulnerability written across every line of his face. This wasn't the boss or the calculated businessman. This was just a guardian who'd nearly lost everything. Stay, he said simply, not as Sophie's teacher, Not as someone I'm protecting because you helped us. Stay as. He struggled for a moment, then forced himself to continue. Stay as family, Rachel. Real family. Mine and hers. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious and terrifying. I know what my world is, Alex continued when Rachel didn't immediately respond. I know what I am, what I've done. I know I'm asking you to tie yourself to something dangerous and dark and complicated. But Rachel, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, you're the missing piece we didn't even know we needed. You make us whole. Rachel stood up slowly, her entire body trembling as she moved toward him. Alex, are you asking me to— I'm asking you to marry me, he said, the words coming out in a rush. I'm asking you to be Sophie's guardian and my wife, and the heart of whatever kind of family we can build together. I'm asking you to take all of us, the good, the bad, the dangerous, and let us be yours. Rachel's breath caught. Through the window, she could see Sophie had stopped her lesson and was watching them intently, her dark eyes bright with hope. Yes, she whispered, and the word felt like coming home. Alex's expression transformed, relief and joy, and something deeper flooding his face. He stepped forward and cupped her face in his hands, his thumb tracing across her cheekbone like he still couldn't believe she was real. Are you sure? He asked. Once you're part of this family, Rachel, I'll never let you go. I don't want you to, she whispered back. The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, full of promises and hope, and the fragile beginning of something beautiful. They were interrupted by the library door slamming open as Sophie barreled into the room, her face flushed with excitement and her hands moving frantically. Are you getting married? She signed to both of them. Are we going to be a real family? Rachel knelt down to her level, her hands steady as she signed back. If that's what you want, sweetheart. Sophie's response made both adults freeze. Mom, she signed, looking directly at Rachel. Then she turned to Alex. Dad. Her small face was radiant with joy. I have a mom and dad now. A real family. Alex's composure finally cracked completely. He sank to his knees beside Rachel and pulled both her and Sophie into his arms, holding them like they might disappear if he let go. For the first time in his adult life, Alex Volkov, feared by enemies and respected by allies, a man who controlled an empire built on power and violence, felt truly at peace. Outside the library windows, the morning sun painted the mansion's grounds in gold, and for once, the fortress felt like what it had always been meant to be. A home where a little girl who'd spent 2 years being invisible could finally be seen, where a woman who'd lost her way could find her purpose, and where a man who'd built walls around his heart could finally let someone in. They were a family forged not by blood but by choice, held together not by obligation but by love, and protected not just by guards and gates, but by the fierce devotion of people who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be vulnerable enough to care.